Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be taking a look at Smile by Z-Man Games. Smile is for 3 to 5 players, and it takes about 30 minutes to play. It's a pretty basic card game, other than its one core mechanic, which is this unique bidding system, which is different than anything I've used before. It's so unique that I actually still can't decide whether or not I love it or I hate it, even after having played the game 6 or 7 times. The premise of the game is that you and the other players are attempting to recollect your lost critters. Your critters, which are tame, are now roaming amongst the wild critters, which are not good news. And in the process, you are going to attempt to lure them to you with fireflies. They love fireflies. However, wild critters also love fireflies, and you don't want anything to do with them. The setup for the game and the rules themselves are extremely simple. The game plays in 30 minutes, and that includes the setup. So for setup, all you're going to do is go through the deck of critters, and you're going to remove any cards that don't match your player size. So if you have 3 players, you're going to remove the cards marked with a 4 or a 5. If you have 4 players, you remove the cards marked with a 5. And if you have 5 players, you play with all the cards. You're going to shuffle that deck, and you're going to place it down in the center of the table. You're then going to deal each player 6 of these yellow glass beads. These represent the fireflies. Players are going to pick them up, and they're going to conceal their hand. They're either going to put it under the table, behind their back, whatever they choose. But the point is that other players shouldn't know how many fireflies that you have remaining. Obviously, at the beginning of the game, everybody realizes that everyone has 6 fireflies. But as the game moves forward, it's almost like trying to count cards in blackjack. You're very quickly going to lose track of who has what as far as fireflies go. You're also going to notice that you have these 5 blue beads. These are teardrops. They're basically a negative victory point. You don't want those. I'll go into how you might collect those later in the game. So once you've shuffled the deck and you've dealt everybody their starting 6 fireflies and they've scooped those up and concealed those, you're going to go into the first step of the first round. This is a 10-round game. The first step is the search step. You're going to flip over from the deck a number of critter cards equal to the number of players. You're then going to arrange those critter cards from lowest value to highest value. Critters can have a negative value, a positive value, even a value of 0. Once you've arranged them from lowest to highest, you move on to the lure step, starting with player 1, who is the last player who saw a firefly. Your players are going to choose either to take the offer action or the collect action. Offer is as simple as picking one of your fireflies out of your concealed hand and placing it onto the lowest valued critter. It has to be the lowest valued critter. It doesn't matter which critters already have fireflies on them or not. Or players can take the collect action. To collect a critter, that critter must have at least 1 firefly on it, in which case you scoop the critter up, you place it face up in front of you, and you place the fireflies that were on that critter when you collected it into your hand, and then reconceal your hand. This is why you're quickly going to lose track of which players have how many fireflies. At that point, player turn order passes to the next player clockwise, and that player can either offer or collect. You can only collect if a critter has at least 1 firefly on it, and if you offer, you must offer to the lowest valued critter. And that's pretty much the entire game. Once there's only 1 critter remaining in that round, the final player who has not collected a critter yet receives that critter automatically, whether or not it has any fireflies on it. At that point, you move into the next round by searching for a number of critters equal to the number of players, and beginning with the player who received the last critter. So if you received that final critter, whether or not it had fireflies on it because it was simply the last one and you were the last player who hadn't collected yet, you become player 1 for the next round. And obviously you're going to start by placing a firefly via the offer action, because you can't collect, because none of them have fireflies on them, because you're the first player. The game proceeds like that until you reach the end of round 10, at which point everybody stops and counts up how many total points they have amongst the critters in front of them. You also gain 1 extra point for every 5 fireflies that you have in your hand, rounded down, and minus 1 point for every teardrop that you have in front of you. You collect teardrops if on your turn you can neither offer a firefly because your hand is empty, nor can you collect a critter because you are player 1 and there are no available critters to collect because none of them have fireflies on them. In that case, you must take a teardrop and then take 1 firefly and immediately offer it to the lowest valued critter. It's sort of a fail-safe. When we first started playing the game, we weren't really sure if we liked it because it seemed almost oversimplified. You didn't really have any options during your turn. Either you offer, in which case you offer exactly 1 firefly, and you're not even allowed to choose what you offer it to. You must offer it to the lowest critter. or you collect, which you can only do if the lowest critter has fireflies on it, in which case you collect the lowest critter. It seemed very directed and very sort of automatically tracked in one direction. We didn't realize that the actual game was in the bidding mechanic. The way that this sort of works is almost like a Texas Hold'em style poker, where you're trying to bluff your opponents, except instead of having a hand of concealed cards, you have a concealed number of fireflies in your hand. So say, for example, a critter comes out and it's the lowest valued critter because it's -4. Well, you certainly don't want to add -4 to your current score of critters, so you want to avoid collecting that one. So you place an offering of 1 firefly on it, and then you pass to the next player, and they place an offering of 1 firefly because they don't want to collect it either, and so on and so forth. It goes around the table. Well, meanwhile, this critter, which has a negative value, is slowly becoming more and more valuable in the overall sense because it's got fireflies building up on it, and you need fireflies to make offers to better critters. So eventually it's going to reach a sort of a tipping point where one player decides, you know what, sure, it's a -4 critter, but for 7 fireflies, I'll scoop that up. And then those fireflies go into their hand, and now once that goes below the table or it goes wherever they're holding it to conceal it, everybody else is going to immediately, or at least very quickly, fail to remember how many fireflies that player has. So when it comes time to push further into the next round, that player has lots of fireflies to work with, and you can sort of bluff your way past the lower cards to get to the higher cards. You have to keep in mind, once you run out of fireflies, the only option is collect. So say, for example, there's only 2 cards left in play, and you have a handful of fireflies, and your opponent, who has been bidding tons of fireflies, or I should say offering tons of fireflies, to avoid taking the lower cards, is now down to 3 or 4 in their hand. Meanwhile, you're holding something like 10 or 11. We'll say the only 2 cards left are a -2 and a 4. Well, if it's between you and him, because once a player collects, they no longer bid for or they no longer offer for the rest of that round. Once you collect, you're sort of out of the round. If it's between 2 players and one has 10 and one has 3 fireflies, and there's a -2 and a +4 left on the board, they're essentially going to bid back and forth until the player with fewer fireflies runs out and has to collect the weaker critter, in which case the other player automatically collects the higher critter. Now, the downside to that is that they're collecting it with no fireflies on it, so they're not recouping any of the fireflies that they offered in order to get to the state where they could collect that critter. So it's a very interesting betting mechanic where you're almost trying to press the bluff of your opponent using fireflies and trying to get them to think that you have more in your hand than you do, so they give up sooner and collect a weaker critter so that you can get a higher critter without having to spend so many fireflies. It's really interesting, and it can get kind of subtly cutthroat. I'm not really sure if that's even possible, but that's how it feels. As far as my overall feeling about the game, it's got a lot of pros, I will say. It's a cheap buy. I want to say it was only $20. It's a fast playthrough. It really is 30 minutes or less. I want to say most of our games were under that, and that's including setup, even though we're playing with 4 or 5 players. The art on the cards is beautiful and adorable. I really like the art style. They did a great job with that. And any game that gives you a bucket of glass beads is just a lot of fun because they feel great in your hand. They are fun to look at. They make a great sound when they plink down onto the table. The only thing that's strange is wrapping your head around this bidding mechanic that the offering system utilizes. It's very weird to get a hold on, and like I said, I still can't decide whether or not I like it because it's at the same time so targeted and so forced, but also completely devoid of any kind of standard rule set. It's more like a bluff. If you offer, you have to offer to a specific place. And so you know that every other player is going to be basically focusing on the same few things, and it really does come down to who has the most fireflies. The other mechanic that I mentioned, the color system on the upper left corner of your creatures, or your critters. If you collect a critter that has a matching color as one critter that you've already collected, they both get discarded because they scare each other off. So that also comes into play when you're determining which critters you want to collect. There might be a critter that has a lower value, and even though it's not necessarily good for you, it might be less of a loss to take that critter than it would be if you took another critter with a color matching one of your high-valued critters, because then they both get scared away. Here's an example of that. Say there was a -1 critter that was colored white, and then you had on your table a +5 critter that was colored blue. and then on the board there was a +2 critter that was colored blue. Well, it would be great to collect that 2 critter, but he's going to scare away your 5 critter, and in fact you're going to drop 5 in total value. Whereas if you just collect that -1 critter, which is white, it's not going to scare anything away, and you're only going to go down 1. So it's a loss of 1 versus a loss of 5. So it's odd in the sense that you actually want to go for that negative critter. And if you're quick enough to realize that and to do that math out, then other players won't necessarily catch on, and you'll have an opportunity to snag that critter, maybe even with some fireflies on it. Well, obviously with at least 1 firefly on it, but maybe with a handful, because other players might be thinking, well, I don't want that. It's a -1. Why would I want that? I want to get farther up the rungs to get that +2, or maybe whatever's beyond that. Maybe there's a 5 further up the row. But to the other players, they're only looking at it as a negative value, whereas to you, you're looking at it as a safe haven to possibly losing that blue 5 that you have because you accidentally collect that blue 2. Now, players may realize that, and they may try to scoop it away before you get a chance to, and force you to go for that blue card because they want to screw with you and they want you to lose your +5. It generates a very interesting dynamic where there's a lot of different things you have to keep in mind, even though your actual actions are very limited. It's either bid, in which case you must bid to the lowest card, offer, I should say, or collect, in which case you're only going to collect the lowest card. So what you can do is very limited, but what goes into which of those 2 options you make is constantly in flux. You also have to keep in mind what other players might be trying to gain, what other players are trying to achieve. Is there a card that will mess with them more than it will mess with you, like that blue to blue scenario I was just talking about? Maybe you can force that onto another player. Another thing is you can kind of press your luck. For example, in that same scenario where you were looking to collect that -1 white card, because the blue card, even though it's positive, would destroy one of your blue cards. Maybe you don't want to just take that, but you want to get some fireflies out of it too, because your hand's running a little low, but other players don't know that. So you bid on it. And other players might look at your board and go, well, that's weird. I would think he would want the white firefly, or sorry, want the white -1 critter, because if they take the blue, it's going to screw them up. But maybe they're going beyond the blue. Maybe they're looking to that red 5 that's further up the row. And so they don't want the -1, there's no reason for them to take it, so they put a firefly on it, and so do a few other players, and then it comes back to you. Now at this point, knowing that you actually do want the -1 white card, you could take it and you've gotten 3 or 4 fireflies out of it. But if you want to press your luck, you can put another firefly down and hope that it makes it another round around the table. Well, now it comes back to you and you've collected 8 fireflies on top of the card that you wanted anyways. But if you press that luck and it gets to another player and they think, well, 5 fireflies, that's worth me taking a -1, and they scoop it up, now you've screwed yourself, because now you lost the card you actually wanted because you were too greedy and you were trying to press for more fireflies by sort of bluffing your friends out. It's a really interesting, weird mechanic. So because of that, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the game to everyone. If that doesn't sound interesting to you, or it sounds boring, or like I said, overly simplistic like we thought it was at first, I could totally see you passing on this game. But for me, the artwork and the glass beads make the game well worth the $20 that it takes to pick up. And the fact that the game can be played in 20 to 30 minutes for 3 to 5 players is great, because I like little filler games like that. And anytime I get a game that offers me a new, unique mechanic, especially one that I can show to friends so quickly and have them get a feel for within minutes, and immediately make up their own minds as to whether or not they like it, I think that's a game worth owning. So I would recommend Smile by Z-Man Games. I think it's fun, I think it's unique, I think it's pretty to look at, and even if you decide that you don't like it, you can always show it to new friends and see if they like it. Maybe that makes it worth playing. Or at the very least, you're only out about $20. So this has been Smile by Z-Man Games. I hope you give it a chance if you think it looks interesting, and if you do, let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you guys haven't yet, go down below and subscribe. Make sure you set your notification bell to all if you want to see more reviews like this. Maybe leave a comment, especially if you actually get a chance to play the game. Let me know what you think about it. And I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.